Hi, and welcome to Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. I'm your host, Rachelle Kuramoto. Join me each week for masterclasses and conversations about the skills and experiences that matter most to startups in the innovation economy. You will hear from subject matter experts and founders. We're here to inspire, inform, and occasionally even entertain you. Let's get started. Today, we welcome Karen Walker. She is a seasoned strategic advisor and executive coach who has helped some of the world's fastest growing companies navigate the challenges of hypergrowth. She's also the author of No Dumbing Down, a guide for CEOs on organizational growth. Karen brings a wealth of knowledge on how to align teams, scale operations, and sustain directional momentum during periods of rapid expansion. Her experience is rooted in her time as part of the executive leadership team at Compaq. She was there during its historic meteoric rise. And as such, Karen understands firsthand what it takes to survive and thrive in a hypergrowth environment. Today, she takes that useful knowledge and helps leaders unlock their organization's full potential through strategic planning, leadership alignment, communication, culture building, and more. And that's what you will learn in our conversation today. So let's get started. Hi, and welcome to Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Karen Walker. She is a seasoned strategic advisor and executive coach. She's also the author of No Dumbing Down, a guide for CEOs and organizational growth. Karen has experienced something that I think a lot of our listeners have thought about, maybe dreamed about, maybe experienced, but we're going to have a deep conversation about it today, and I can't wait to jump in. Karen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Eager to have this conversation with you.
Wonderful. Well, Karen, before we really kind of jump into the lesson part of our conversation, I would love for you to share a bit about yourself, your background, and how you kind of came into your consulting and coaching work.
Yeah, thank you. So, a place to start. I have a degree in engineering, so I come at this work a little bit differently than many people who do what I do for a living. I happen to be a very early employee at Compaq Computers, sort of pre-revenue. We can talk more about that in a minute. But I fell into an opportunity that and maybe we'll even talk about why I chose that. But it really set me up for what I've done for the last couple of decades. I love your word seasoned. I would say I'm seasoned. I've been doing this for, 20 plus years now, which is mostly working with tech CEOs and their leadership teams to deal with all the things that happen after you find your product market fit. Right. And once you find that product market fit, that is really when hypergrowth kicks in. And I work both on an individual coaching basis, but more generally, I work with the team, and then in most cases, the entire organization on how to deal with the issues and opportunities, as we say, that arise from hypergrowth.
Wow, that's really interesting. And it is what we'll be spending most of our time talking about today, this idea of hypergrowth and the reality of it. But you also mentioned product market fit, and that is definitely something that, our listeners who tend to be startup leaders are working really hard on. And I'm curious, I would imagine you have a great perspective on how do you know when you've hit product market fit? Is it a gut thing? Is it a data thing?
Oh, it's definitely a data thing, but they will impact your gut.
You mean the ulcer goes away, or?
It's I wanted to catch a fish, but be careful what you ask for.
Right.
Actually, there is no be careful. It was I'll just talk, maybe this is a great time to talk a little bit about the experience at Compaq. So
Please.
Compaq, for those who aren't familiar, because it was some time ago now, it was three guys who left a company called Texas Instruments and started a company to make what was then the first portable computer. And I'm going to say portable in quotes because it was the size of what my mother's generation would have called a sewing machine case.
Yeah.
But it's 22 pounds. And I remember I got off the plane in Singapore and there was someone carrying a Compaq, and I was like over the moon that we had
You
actually
were like
reached
this.
that far. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
amazing. Anyway, it was at a time when portable computers and actually personal computing was just coming into the fore, and there was huge demand for our product. So I was fortunate that I was able to start when we were pre-revenue. We had about 100 employees, and I was there for 14 years. We were at $15 billion when I left and about 17,000 employees. But we did $111 million in our first year. We were
Whoa.
the fastest company to a billion at that time. We were the fastest company in American history, fastest growing company at that time. And it was all product market fit. And there was no doubt in terms of the data that we were unable to keep up with the demand. And so, I mean, that's how you know, right? It's not push, it's pull.
It's Paul.
There's
Mhm.
pull, and you know it in your gut because you can't keep up. I mean, I think that's true sort of in our everyday lives. You can't do everything there is to do, and recognizing that is a big step towards sanity. But when you are in sort of startup mode and you've reached product market fit, um, this inability to keep up with even the most important, most urgent things, it's rarely possible. And so I think some of the lessons from that have to do with understanding the importance of alignment, right? Because you only have so many resources, so many people, so many dollars that you can do something with. Making sure that you're aligned, because when the organization gets out of alignment, even slightly, especially at the top, right, then it's a big misalignment by the time it gets to the rest of the organization. So the importance of staying aligned because things change, and so you need to make constantly checking in to make sure we still, on this path, that we move to this path. Being clear about what the most important priorities are, because the 10,000 decisions that people have to make in the organization every day, if you're not clear about prioritization, those will also drift from whatever your conscious alignment is. And then I think also this idea of working on a high performance team, right? We all
Mm,
want to work on high performance teams, right?
yeah.
A players like to work with other A players, but you have to put work into maintaining a team, and we can talk more about that when we talk about culture in a bit. But maybe the biggest individual impact is just understanding that everything you do and everything you don't do has an impact in the organization. And so being as thoughtful as you can be about what it is that you're spending your time on, because there's no shortage, as I say, of urgent and important things to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you say what you do and what you don't do, because I think if you're not listening carefully, probably what you think is where you're falling down. But
Yeah,
what I hear you saying is, what are you strategically saying no to so that you can focus on the urgent and important? I mean, if we're going to talk Eisenhower grid here, like, you know,
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
where you have to say no to say yes. Am I
Yeah.
hearing you correctly?
Yes, because your most precious resource, though it might seem like money, is really your time
It's
and what
time.
you're spending
Of
your time
course.
on.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
so I think as long as we're on the Eisenhower box, yes, urgent and important.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how to carve out time for the not urgent important, right?
Sure.
Which is actually also one of the hardest things because there's no shortage of urgent things coming at you.
Yeah.
But your ability to think and make strategic decisions, those are not done with the urgency. They're
Yeah.
not done as well with urgency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I've heard people talk about this idea of velocity, and it's not just
Yes.
acceleration, it's got a direction and it has a purpose and it has some guardrails. And I think that, that's a very important distinction. And I think I hear you talking about that as well. So what was your role at Compaq?
I was vice president of operating services, which was basically all of the physical infrastructure,
Okay.
and wasn't a very big deal when we were, in Houston and sort of next to a cow pasture. There would be cows mooing. When salespeople were on the phone, there were problems there. But
I love that dichotomy.
high tech Houston,
Yeah.
and we had cows. But the operating services, as I was saying, was physical infrastructure. That was the longest lead time item for the company. And so what I learned, I came not quite straight out of college, but almost, was the overwhelming importance of flexibility in plans. Because once you hit hypergrowth, you don't know what's coming at you. And in our case, in Compaq's case, IBM was our biggest competitor. And there was always this concern that they were going to find a way to put us out of business. If anyone has watched *Halt and Catch Fire*, that series, that is very loosely based. We didn't have quite as much fun, maybe, as they were having. We had a different kind of fun, but yeah, no, not so many love storylines. But the thought that the bigger competitor would find a way to put us out of business, and so you couldn't just sort of go all out, because there was a concern that then you would have more than you needed. Right? Was this bubble going to burst? And so finding a way to plot, here's what we think we're going to do, knowing that never happens in a straight line, right? Putting some sort of guardrails on that. And I actually talk about this in the book, that sort of you're playing bumper cars, right? You want to have some guardrails that you can bounce off of. And when you hit that guardrail, to have the strategic conversation about, do we need to change that? And if so, by how much? And when there were times when there were downturns in the market, which we actually did hit at one point, how far down do you go when you hit that guardrail? What happens then?
So there was some sort of best case, worst case scenario planning happening.
A lot of that.
A
Yeah.
lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we would be hiring hundreds more people a day. Hundreds of more people a week than we had forecast at one point. All those people, right, need a place to work. And, we were not working from home in those days.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
there was just a lot of infrastructure that it took to, with building factories, right? It
Yeah.
takes a while to build a factory. It takes a while to build a distribution center. Even with outsourcing, you have to bring people up, so that they're able to produce for you. And anyway, that's how I got
Wow.
good at understanding the importance of being flexible.
So I have two questions for you. One is straightforward definition for our listeners. How do you distinguish between growth and scale, just
Mhm.
fast growth, and hyper growth? How do you distinguish between the two? And then my second question, which is a bit of a part two, is you're managing teams and you are really building the infrastructure for the people. How are you keeping all of the people working in the same pace if you're
Mm.
in that hyper growth mode? So let's answer the first part first. And hopefully it's a very straightforward sort of definition, like, what's the difference between fast growth and hyper growth?
Yeah, so I mean, there are different definitions for that. I think I loosely think of organizations that are growing in the 30 to 40 or more percent year-over-year growth. And it's one thing to be doing that with software, which is hard. That's really what I've spent most of the last 2 decades working on, or with software firms. It was a whole nother thing to be doing it with hardware,
Right.
because it's not, this is not as easy as it sounds, but it's not, oh, let's just, rev up another server. It's, oh, let's put another factory in place, which was a different challenge. So anyway, I would say somewhere in 30, 40
Okay.
more,
Okay. So it's kind of a
depending on who you talk to.
yeah.
And that's, and the year over year, that's a big number.
It is a big
Don't
number.
we all wish we could be
Absolutely.
getting that in our portfolios?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that that's what prompted my question was, it occurred to me as you were talking that that does require a tremendous amount of infrastructure. It requires a
Yeah.
tremendous number of people. And I think oftentimes you hear companies that are in a rapid growth phase talking about, and this is not a question necessarily about hiring, but more about leadership, that
Mhm.
they're like putting breathing bodies in place because they need breathing bodies to grow. Right.
Right.
And you find that you said earlier, A players like to work with A players. So, you were leading a team. And I think that if I'm not mistaken,
Oh,
that
geez.
team grew well. How did you manage the pace of work for a team
Yeah.
as the whole company around you was growing so quickly?
Yeah. I think the most important answer to that question is culture,
Okay.
right? The company culture. If the culture is healthy, and we can talk about what that means, then when you bring people in, they're self-selecting into a culture that they want to work in, and if you've hired well, that they are suited to work in. And then the culture, which is simply in my terms, it's the actions you reward and tolerate in an organization.
Okay.
And I think we have to emphasize, underline that, and tolerate in an organization, because if that and the culture is going to change. Let me also be clear about that. You're not going to have the same culture when you have 1,000 people as you had when you're 100, right? You're not going to have the same at 5,000 or 15,000. Of course, that's the sort of the sad story in some ways of what happens to big companies is that the culture changes to a place where different kinds of people want to opt in for different reasons, right? People opt in to a 100-person company or a 50-person company because they want that, right? You might opt into a 50,000-person company because the benefits are good. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different set of priorities. And where we get trouble is where those things are not aligned. But anyway, I think the culture is in some way the guardrails for how you stay aligned. And my own team went from my party of one to about 300 people and thousands of contractors and consultants globally they were doing work on our infrastructure. And we over communicated, right? We valued over communication. We spent a lot of time making sure that leadership was aligned, so that the messages to the next level and the next level, that game of telephone, sort of kept to a minimum. There were lots of opportunities for communication that were sort of skip level. I traveled a lot to be with people. I think there's no and today, right, when we think about we mostly I think most of us work remotely for the most part, spending time face to face where you can build relationships and build trust, which is you can do this way, right? It's just harder. And there's already so many complexities in keeping a high performance team together that not spending time face to face, not spending time developing relationships in that way, I think it's a lost opportunity for many today.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I think those are really excellent suggestions, and I do think that with the RTO mandates, we are getting back to a recognition of how important face to face
Yeah.
is. Like we can do it, but it's better. It's better
Yeah,
not to. You can
exactly.
you can
And
help it.
and and RTO has to be done thoughtfully as well, right?
Right.
I know a number of companies where you're gonna be back in the office 3 days a week, and
Yeah.
you're in your office having Zoom calls.
Yeah.
And so, are we really getting from that? And so how do we be in the office, in a way that makes sense and continues to help the organization, be efficient and effective?
Yeah. So I think we've touched on, infrastructure, we've touched on culture, um, leadership, behavior and modeling to an extent. As far as the business model goes,
Mhm.
what do you when you're consulting with startup leaders, pulling in this experience you've had, what do leaders really need to be thinking about in terms of building the ability to scale into their business model?
Yeah. These are the important, not urgent until they are
Yeah,
elements,
the
right?
pillars.
So,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, yeah. So I think there are these foundational elements, right, about
Yeah,
knowledge and talent that you have to keep in mind. I think one of the as we think about talent in particular, there's a trap that almost everybody, actually maybe everybody, falls into at least once, and that is never hire because you're tired of looking. Right? It's at some point we all get frustrated and say, better just have someone doing something there than
yeah,
no one doing nothing and me having to do it all, right? And yeah, I would say if you're tired of looking, contract, right? It's not the most efficient, it's not the most inexpensive, but the cost of a mishire, especially when you're scaling, is huge. It's not just the literal cost; it's the time and effort you put into bringing somebody up to scale, and then the kind of the damage that they do. And this is not always someone's fault. It's just if they're not coming to work every day thinking they're going to cause damage, but by not being able to do the job, especially when you're scaling, that is big. I think it's important to overhire a bit, right? Especially when you're scaling, and also in your business model, um, find a way to acknowledge the ambiguity that goes on, right? So I think that you need to have great alignment with your investors, of course, right? I think there are numerous issues I've seen over time when investors are saying they want to go this way, and the founders or CEOs are like, "Yeah, but this is better, and this is why." And the investors are like, "No, we're going here." And of course, who has the power in that relationship is often the investors, right? And so that can be an issue. But I think it's just important to be as clear and have those communications be as open and productive as possible.
yeah, yeah. So I'm hearing you say some things, and I like the idea. I think it's a very gracious comment that someone who might be a mishire, it's just not the fit. It's not the fault. It's just not the fit, and
It's right.
and that
It's fit, not fault. Yeah.
right, and that there is opportunity cost there, and that there is lost time, and all of that, and the other thing I think I've heard you say is in terms of talking about some of the pressures and maybe speed bumps are ambiguity,
Oh,
and just a lack of alignment, whether that's between leadership and execution teams or boards and investors and leadership. It seems like communication is a panacea for most of this, but I'm curious to, have you give us a sense of what are the most common issues that you see as you are consulting,
mhm.
with leaders of these companies, and what is the panacea? Is there a panacea?
Yeah. Let me start with ambiguity, because I think it's certainly a big topic of interest for me, and that comes from the work that I've done.
Yeah.
I think if you can hire people who are innately curious, because every day when you come in, when you're in this growth period, you are going to be looking at new problems, right? And while there will be things in the organization that you can get on some sort of repeatable, scalable um, procedure, which is what we want for some things, right? You want it to be like utility, flip the switch, it just happens. Most of what you're doing, most of what leadership is doing, and in fact, in hypergrowth, most of what everybody is doing is dealing with stuff they haven't seen before. And if they have seen it before in terms of the thing itself, the people are different, right? And so it's just not the same. And so
Yeah.
if you can be curious about what's going on and comfortable with not having the answer, but be comfortable with the ambiguity of the situation, and I have to say also we want to combine that with a bias for action, right? Somebody who just wants to hang out in ambiguity all the time, that's great, but you're in fast growth mode. You're in hypergrowth. You have to take an action. And so figuring out how long you can stay without an answer, right? When does the decision need to be made, right? And to wait until that moment so you can continue to gather information and make the best possible decision with the information and the time that you have. So I think this combination of comfort with ambiguity, bias for action, which comes from people who are curious, but also know that things need to get done.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. I think some other, so not hiring for that is a misstep, right? I think we also run into issues where we have product innovation versus customer satisfaction tension, right? Especially as you grow, because when you're small, I think the expectations of your customers are smaller in some ways, and as you grow, the risks are bigger, right, for you to make a misstep. So great to fail fast to break things, right? As long as you're conscious about what the risks are, and you're conscious about when you are actually breaking things. But as you get bigger, that risk reward scale changes, and so as you get bigger and you get the big customers that you really want for your products, they expect more. And they don't expect more from your product; they expect more from your organization about how things are going to be handled. So I think that's important, this tension between innovation and customer sat. Um, I think a stagnant culture will actually inhibit growth because what were once sort of the big tenets of the organization may not change, but there will be change. For example, I think about this as a continuum too. It's call it my SOP continuum. So there's the seat of the pants versus standard operating procedure, right? And where's the right place to be on that continuum for the problem you're facing, right? And when you're small, there's a lot of seat of the pants going on, which is great. That's how you get things done quickly. As you get larger, you have to be able to put standard operating procedures in place for those things where it makes sense to do.
Yeah. I think I
Yeah.
actually really like that. And I want to press on that for just a second because, this to me goes very nicely with this idea of curiosity where, chances are if you're a young company or you're growing faster than you ever expected, there's a lot you haven't seen before. But you're still the one responsible for ultimately making the decisions. And so you might have to fly by the seat of your pants because you just don't know. And in other cases, where you've seen it before and you've got some structure in place and you've got the right people in the organization, you can create some standard operating procedures. But what I love about what you're talking about here is that malleability that comes from having both. And, one of the questions that I think often arises when you've got a company that is growing really quickly is product market fit. And you touched on this with innovation. Product market fit may change dramatically. And you've got to be able to spot where you no longer have product market fit and fix it quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, what are the markers? What are the metrics
Right.
that you're watching for? What are the leading indicators to
Yeah.
see what's happening with your product market fit?
Yeah.
I do think, though, that something you touched on a moment ago, which was decision making, is really important for us to talk about as well. Because what happens in these ambiguous first time you've seen them situations is that decisions that come to leadership in an organization that's growing fast are often 49-51 decisions, right? They are not, there's no clear one right answer. And if there was, it would have been made elsewhere in the organization and would not have come to you. And so the way that you approach and make those decisions is really important. And again, I think that comes back to alignment. It comes back to prioritization. And when it's not clear, the marker that I use for which way to go is which one can be better executed.
Yeah,
Right,
that makes a
because if
lot
it's
of sense.
49-51, maybe the decision itself isn't so important, but the execution is. And then once you make a hard decision like that, you just have to move on.
Yeah.
There's there's not, certainly you want to track to see, how are we doing against that? But you don't want to have any sort of buyer's remorse or decision maker's remorse around that.
I would imagine that happens occasionally anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, so as we wrap up, I just want to summarize a lot of what I've heard you say, and you just summarized a couple of them. I mean, as being really, really important for a company that is in a phase of really rapid growth. One is building a culture really on understanding what you're encouraging versus what you tolerate. Um, Alignment across all the different parts of the organization and the influences on the organization. Communication, especially in-person communication.
Hmm.
Curiosity, that is a skill to hire for, along with a bias for action and the ability to prioritize. Am I missing anything?
I think the only thing I would add, and such a great summary, is that it's not just what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. Because
Yep.
the how you're doing it, and I think this is sort of a summary of the summary, the how you're doing it is the foundation for
Yeah.
everything else that's going forward. And when you start making compromises about how you're doing it, i.e., maybe you've gotten off track on your culture, or you've decided to let a metric slide, or you've hired someone who you otherwise would have hired. When you let go of the how you're doing it, that has big ramifications. Just
Yeah.
if you have to do that, be aware of it, watch for it.
Yep. That's great. That's great. And, I love it because what this tells us is it doesn't matter what industry you're in. You could be making portable computers or streaming sports or, like doing market
Yeah.
research. I mean, all of these things are foundational. And I think that should be really encouraging to our listeners. So as we wrap up, um, tell us a little bit about where people can engage with you and where can they get your book?
Well, thank you. I'm at Karen Walker US on all the social media platforms. I have pretty active LinkedIn presence. I interview
Great.
C-suite executives from some amazing companies. I'm just so grateful to be able to take my curiosity and get my questions answered. And then, of course, my website is karenwalker.us. And then my book is available places that sell books.
All the
So
places.
that's right, all the places, no dumbing down, which is really about how to deal with growth once you found your product market fit.
Yep. That is wonderful. Well, Karen, I can't thank you enough for your time and for all of the wisdom that you have been able to share. It's not often that people can come through an experience and distill it into something that is genuinely useful to others. So appreciate that.
Great, thank you. And I just offer to your audience, I am always up for a 15-minute conversation with anybody about anything. So don't be shy about reaching out for that. And Karen at KarenWalker.us, and one of my small team will get back with you, and we'll make some time to chat. Thank you
That
again for the
is,
opportunity.
well, thank you. That's a great offer. Thanks so much for tuning in to Extraordinary Pursuits. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share the show. It helps others to find us. Now, let's go build the future of the innovation economy.